So listen, at PCMA, the whole goal of PCMA, is about driving economic and social outcomes through business events, right? Some of the things that are happening, first, the organization is about 40% larger than it was prior to COVID. So it's grown quite significantly. We've got a community in excess of 60,000 now around the world in 78 countries. So it's from that perspective, it's grown quite significantly. Where we're going, what we're doing, we've just introduced a new certification, if you want to call it the MBA of the business events industry, for event organizers that are seasoned practitioners, not new entries. And they would have to do a capstone project. So it would be capstone project based on the country you live in, the organization you work for, so it'll be very, very relevant to your job. So as in terms of professional development, we're focusing on that. Secondly, we want to bring new tools into the industry. So technology, obviously we've heard a lot about it, AI, more and more AI, but we're looking at using tools not just for work efficiencies, but about aggregating data. And aggregating data so you can have better insights and help organizations, corporations, and associations alike be better at their roles and getting the insights that they need to be more proficient, more effective in their roles. That's the second part. And the third part is just continuing the journey about what we talk about, climate. And one would argue today, climate is taking a bit of a backseat in the world, but it doesn't make it less important. And how we are changing hearts and minds and embedding that in how events are organized and your business norms is what we want to do. Influence behavior change as opposed to checking a box. And then in the world that we live in today, I would say there's a lot of noise versus what really matters. And how do we get people to focus from the noise and elevate them? And this is where we're talking about how do we engage our members and our customers so that they can be effective in their roles as opposed to a lot of noise. And that's where our focus is at. Well, I think it's still too much talk. However, there is action. There is real credible action that we're looking at what people are doing in their RFPs, how they're holding their vendors accountable, how they're holding their destinations accountable, and how they're holding themselves accountable, and how we measure that, and how we are measuring that year over year to see if we're making progress. But I'll say this. To me, it's still a lot of talk. In Europe, I would say Europeans are leading when it comes to sustainability. But in North America, as an example, only 7% of the people have it in their RFPs or are really actively doing something about it. So there's work to be done. And I think that we still have a long road ahead of us. So first and foremost, I do think that I want to touch on the word disruption. And I think that when disruption happens, it creates opportunities, right? And so as a kid, when someone told me you were being disruptive, it was a bad thing, right? But there are opportunities in disruption. It's how innovation happens. However, what we're talking about here is mobility of people and our lack of mobility of people because of the current tensions. I do think that what that is creating is certain events from the Middle East, for example, are having a difficult time staging those events, and it's creating compression at different parts of the world. For example, right here in Singapore or in Europe, I was just in Madrid, and at that day that I was in Madrid, there was 3 groups looking to relocate from the Middle East to Madrid. So it's creating compression, and it's creating lack of mobility of people. I do think that's a shorter term impact, but in anything, whether it was SARS and way back in 2003, that created a lot of dislocation of groups, or COVID. It is creating opportunities for some and a little bit of a setback, but ultimately I think these disruptions has a way of creating new innovations. Well, one of the things that we are very encouraged by, and I am really encouraged by, is with disinformation, misinformation, AI, The, the notion of trust is so much more important. And how do we learn and get to trust people? It is through face-to-face events, coming together. We build bonds and build bridges. So actually what I see in the future is a world of more events, not less, and a world where we need each other more. If you look at pre-COVID, I'm not saying that didn't happen and it didn't exist, but we never heard of mental health issues the way we're hearing of it today. And it was when we were apart as humans, we weren't connecting with each other, that all this happened to us. And suddenly there's COVID, realizing that we need to be together. Misinformation and disinformation. 2 years from now, if you're on a Zoom call or a Teams call, it might be your agent representing you. You wouldn't even know. So the future, I think, is very, very bright. Where I see some challenges is that how we get the younger generation to engage with us and also realize there's meaningful careers in our industry so they can take it to the next level.